Hello, readers! This is Reading in the Middle. I'm your host, Anisha Jeffries. Today I'm talking with Victoria E. Pannell and Thorir Sigfusson, co-authors of The Crow's Tales, a middle grade mystery series that's set in a small riverside town of Maplewood. The first book, The Bird Caper, introduces Brandon Woodbury, a 10-year-old boy dealing with a big move, a pet crow accused of theft, and a crew of bullies known as the BB Boys. The next book, The Big Dream, Brandon and his friends race to build a remote-controlled car, learning what it really means to chase a goal and rely on your community. And in the latest book, The Crow's Ring, the kids uncover a ruby ring tied to a decades-old heist and a tugboat in need of saving. I spoke with Victoria and Thor about collaboration, character voices, and why their crow, Ralph, might just be the real hero of the series. So, get ready, pack your shiny objects, fasten your seatbelts. Victoria E. Pannell and Thorir Sigfusson are up next. Well, welcome to Reading in the Middle. How are you today?
We're fine. Thank you for inviting us.
You're welcome.
Very happy to be here.
Happy to have you here. This is great. So I want to get started by asking both of you if you could describe the bird caper using just 3 sounds instead of words, what would they be?
I don't know. For me, it would be probably some kind of a croak because of the crow, but I can't speak like that. So
Call.
there you go.
I like that. I like that sound, crows. So both of you, and this is for both, when you were 10 years old, like Brandon, what felt like the biggest adventure in your life at that time?
Well, for me, 10 was a magical time. I think life begins at 10. You start opening up to experiencing the world, and you start seeing things a little bit different. And I was a kid back in Iceland then, and we were very much free outside, which was important to me, being outdoors. And I mean, all over the place. It wasn't, today, people are very protective. And over there wasn't enough population to really have any danger, so we were free to go anywhere. And that's my background. And so at about that age, I mean, I was all over town and down at the harbor, and I could have gotten into all kinds of trouble, and I did on occasion, but it was a great experience, and it's left a big impression of me growing up.
And that inspired the whole concept of writing about birds, actually, was his childhood. And for me, I would say I was just so attached to my grandfather. We lived with my grandfather when I was young, growing up. And he had a log cabin in the woods. And on weekends, he would go every weekend and he would take me. And so my passion was just waiting for the weekend. And on that Friday, I would get my little brown paper bag and put my toothbrush and my change of underwear and sit on the little wooden steps outside of our house, his house, and just sit there and wait. And he used to deliver tasty cake. I don't know if you're familiar with that, tasty cake or not. Yeah.
Yes.
The cupcakes and all that, everything. And he had a big blue tasty cake truck, and just wait for that truck to drive by the house. And I'm sitting there with my little brown paper bag, and he would come home and change his clothes, and we would jump in that truck and drive. I guess it would take us about an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to the cabin, and we'd spend the whole weekend together there in the woods. And he had built me a swing, and it was not a lot of bells and whistles and things like that. But there was a little restaurant that we would go to that had a jukebox, and when the spirit hit him, he would do the hula with me. He loved everything about Hawaii, and it had a Hawaiian song in there, and he'd give me a quarter, and I'd play like the hula dance 6 times with a quarter. And finally he would get up and do the hula with me, and that just made the whole weekend for me.
Wonderful memory. And you're right, Thor, that 10 years old, that's where everything does begin. I mean, it's for school, at school, home, family. and you really are able, those memories, really positive, great memories, you really remember those.
Yeah, they stick at that age for some reason. And you actually do remember pretty well what you were doing at that time. Now, some people, like I think Victoria remembers way before that. It's kind of turns blank to me that further backwards you go from there. But I think it's a fun age. 10 is a fun age.
And that is why we made Brandon 10. It's a funny thing because when we first started writing the Birdcaper, which that is book 1 in our series.
Yes.
But the funny thing, that's not the first book that we wrote. We didn't know we were going to write a series. The book 2 is The Big Dream.
Mm-hmm.
We wrote that first. It was a gift for our grandchildren. And it was just going to be a gift. And our editor is the one who inspired us to take writing more seriously. Mm-hmm. And he said, I think this is more than just a gift. So it was from that book that we kind of went back and forth with each other and said, well, maybe we could make more than these characters have more than one story. And so then we thought there was something to be said before The Big Dream, and that's how the Birdcaper came to be. When we first started writing the Birdcaper, Brandon was 8. And we went writing along. Then all of a sudden, Brandon was 9. We were almost done the book, and it just seemed like he needed to be that magical 2-digit number. Like Thor said, it just seems like everything comes together when you're 10 years old. That's just like a magical time for a kid, So Brandon became 10 years old. Yeah.
One of the other things that's fun about our series, we decided once we had the 3 books that they would carry the same characters all the way through middle school. So even though book 1 starts at 10, in book 2, the kids are 12. And in book 3, they're 13, turning 14. So they have different adventures and different complications as they age. And so we wanted to carry that through, even though each book is standalone and does not rely on the other.
And their relationships with each other form differently, just like you do in middle school. Mm-hmm. They get more intense, they get more complicated, they change.
I want to mention as well, you're right, you have 3 in the Crow series, in the Crow Tales, excuse me. You have book 1, which is the Birdcaper. And then you have book 2, The Big Dream, which you had mentioned, was originally the first. And then book 3 is The Crow's Ring.
Yes.
R-I-N-G.
Correct.
And so, but I wanna ask, what made you choose a crow and not a dog or a cat to be the heart of Brandon's story? Was there a real life route?
Well, that's my fault. I, growing up in Iceland, we had a lot of birds available to us or near us. I was near the ocean, so there's a lot of seabirds and migrating birds. And of course, in the city, there was a bunch of pigeons, and that's where it started for me. I was interested in pigeon. I started feeding them, and once you feed them and house them, they just hang around and bring their friends. And so it's not something that I want to encourage in a book for people to try and gravitate a bunch of pigeons to their homes. But also, what interested me back then was ravens. And I was big on following ravens. They were very big, very black, very mysterious. They would come in and out of the neighborhoods, and they were very social. They would hang around, telephone poles and fences. They'd observe what you were doing, but they're also not really approachable per se. So you could tell that they were on their own doing their thing, but not very inviting as far as being together with. So anyway, the raven was always in my mind. And then, it was later in life, after I moved to the US and after grade school, I was really in the working world when I even started thinking about writing anything. Uh-huh. And you do write about the things you grew up with and the things that you know. And I wanted to write about pigeons, but again, I was reminded that, nobody wants pigeons. And so I thought that the crow would be interesting because of its mystery nature. And but I wanted it also to be more relatable to kids everywhere. And so I changed it to a crow. You can see a crow everywhere. There's not a raven in every neighborhood. And it's kind of began from there, just my background experience with seeing crows in the neighborhood.
And it was kind of interesting because at one point I was teaching, and Thor is an architect with the government. And so while I'm doing lesson plans or report cards and things like this, he's over in the corner, and he was an architect with the government. So his day was kind of sterile, and he would come home and he needed a creative outlet. And he also is quite a good drawer, also an artist. And so he was either sketching or he was writing. And so he was telling me that he was doing this story and everything. And at that early stages, many years ago, it was about pigeons, and he was going to call it the Pigeon Flyer. Okay. And so he would tell me all these stories about it and everything. And I would listen and I would listen. And then I'd dive back into my lesson plans. And then he retired and he shared more of the story with me. And then all of a sudden I got more involved, and the story kind of took a nosedive. Fortunately, he invited me in to play, and it changed and added more characters. I got girls involved.
Yeah, at first it was just a story about the boys growing up, and I wanted to, actually that was part of it. I wanted to do a book for boys because I didn't see a lot of books out there for boys. And I thought maybe picking something that would be of interest to them, something that they could relate to, the type of things that, the characters eventually got into as far as doing stuff around town. When we got together, though, after deciding that we wanted to have a bigger series, it was important to make it a book that's accessible to everyone. So we added a couple of girls in the story, and actually it's made it very interesting. So now we have 5 characters altogether, 6 if you count the crow, and each one of them has its own unique character that blends and also contrasts. And so we are able to use that now to get into a lot of different types of situations, and the crow kind of comes in and out of it. So I'm really happy that we did get together, and ever since then, we haven't been apart as far as putting these stories together. And so that's a lot of fun too.
You hear a lot of writers will say that when they give advice to people who are starting to write, they'll say, really go out and find support, get a critique partner. Well, we have the ideal situation. We live with our critique partner. I can't imagine writing something without Thor, and we really have a unique writing process together, and it has evolved, and it will probably continue to evolve as we grow because we have a lot to learn, and so our process changes. Each book we've kind of done a little bit differently together, but yeah, it's great, and it's nice to bounce ideas off of each other, brainstorming. We edit each other's work. There's no pride of authorship. We do have a little bit of pain when we see each other slice up each other's work, but we know it's for the good, the betterment.
Well, generally, I'm the boring one coming from writing contracts for the government. And so contracts tend to be structured. And then when Victoria jumps in, it sprinkles a little bit of character in there. So it really helps.
So you both co-wrote the book together, and you mentioned, collaborating, and I want to know what surprised you most about collaborating. Did it change the way about writing?
Yeah, I guess it did in many ways, but one thing that was surprising is, we both have voices, and we both have ideas, and we both have a way of doing things that's different, even though in the end it comes together. And so as we go back and forth with one another, tearing each other apart, once we're back together, it's almost in some cases not recognizable as either one of us. So it's almost like we are reading something from a third person.
It's a rather magical process. Like he said, he writes and has a voice, and I write and have a voice. When we blend them together, it becomes a third voice. Of course, the story has its own voice, but as writers, we have our own. And it is rather magical how that happens. You can't tell. Yeah.
We should try, I guess, writing our own thing and see how it looks. But right now, things are just working so well.
Yeah. Why mess that up? It's working. It's really working out. So why do that?
Not broken, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But Brandon, in the story, Brandon faces a lot of upheaval, a move, losing his home, even his friendships being tested. Why was it important to show that real life doesn't always stay the same, even when we want it to?
Well, that's a good question. Each of the books has a theme. It is a series, but they're each a standalone. There are no cliffhangers. And the Birdcaper book 1, its theme is change. And so the premise is that, he discovers that he has to leave his home, his neighborhood, and his friends, of all of which he loves. And we go on this journey with him of his ups and downs. And he finds that he's faced with a lot of change. And in life, we all have to face change. And it's good for the children to realize and to see Brandon going through this, because children all over the world have that experience. But we go through this journey with him, and we get to discover that he discovers that maybe change isn't as daunting as he first thought it was. So the book sort of shines a light on, it's a feel-good story that shines a light on his perseverance, his friendships, but change. And then the big dream is going to focuses on honesty, and in the Crow's Ring will focus on truth. So,
but one thing that's important is even though there's a lot of, like you say, upheaval, there's a lot of challenges and conflicts that get resolved. The books themselves are intended to be humorous, and we do get that from our readers, that it's just such a funny book. And so you can have these really complicated issues, but make them lighthearted and something that you can observe, but you can also work your way through. And that's something that we want to try and get across.
Yeah. The bones of the book is a fun mystery adventure. And the reviews that we get that really tickle my heart is we've had 2 parents now tell us that my kids love the book. They say that it reminds me of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I go, oh my gosh, I love it,
I was going to ask you if you both could give Brandon a piece of advice for, throughout the series. What would it be?
Well, I don't know. I would say, don't give up. Brandon's character is one of those that he has a hard time making decisions. And he relies on his friends a lot to do that. So he doesn't have the confidence sometimes that it needs to work things out, wanting one of his friends to be there with him. So I would say, maybe experiment with making a decision, even if it doesn't resolve itself the way you want it to, then make another decision. So as long as you start having some confidence in how you work yourself through life, that message I think would be important.
Because in The Birdcaper, ladybugs play a surprising role in helping Brandon, right? And then you shift gears with Brandon having dreams of building a remote control race car. And then, like you mentioned, the mystery of the Crow's Ring, where Brandon and his friends stumble upon a mystery of a stolen ruby ring. When you mentioned humor, I have to admit there's tons of humor. And without giving too much away, can you share a little bit from each piece on what what's most exciting for readers to experience in each of the books, since they're standalone?
Most exciting as far as, let's see.
Don't give anything away. Something that you feel will grab them. Because I love ladybugs. I find that they're a good luck. Every time I see one, I get excited. So that already that grabbed my attention.
Well, you mentioned that. I'll pick up on that. And Brandon, in his move, his grandparents had given him a ladybug kit. And so he is using the ladybug kit. And most of the characters that you get introduced to in the story are young children. There's one character that we meet, and it's a little old lady, and her name is Miss Ruby. And the children meet her by sitting on the front step of Brandon's house, and they're having a little powwow, and all of a sudden they hear this hollering, and they rush down the street, and they find this little old lady just waving her cane in the air, and she's been locked out of her house, and I won't tell you what happened, but they end up having to help her get into her house. And she's this rather, but in order to get to her house, they have to walk past her garden, and they end up having to step through all these rotten tomatoes. So as they step, all this tomato juice is squirting up all over their clothes and their legs and all this mess. And so they get into her house, and the wallpaper reminds them of being in Disneyland, and she's got this rubber tree in her kitchen that grows all the way up to the ceiling, and plants are just growing all over from the ceiling to the floors and the windows, and she's dancing around the kitchen. The kids are just mystified by her, but she comes back to them into the kitchen holding a basket with tomatoes, and she explains to them about aphids, that they're killing, and she calls them her babies are dying on the vine, and that she needs ladybugs. And Brandon is just so excited that he can help this lady because he's growing ladybugs. And the kids are like, "You're what?" So that was kind of a fun experience.
Well, in the Big Dream, right at the beginning of summer, Brandon finds out through his father that a company is coming to town, a new company that produces video games. And in order to, be welcome to town and be supportive of the community, they come up with this idea of having a remote control car race, and the winners would be used in their new video game that they're going to develop in town. Well, of course, Brandon goes berserk. He's found this mission for the summer, and Dad isn't all that thrilled about it, and neither is Mom, because there's other things to do during summer. And it's a very costly thing to do anyway. I mean, how is he going to pay for all the stuff that he has to do to build this car? It's not a off-the-shelf thing. It's something you have to build because the company is going to judge it from its merit of art and design, and so it's a very complicated thing. It is really made for adults. He gets really into the idea of being part of this thing. And that's kind of where the fun begins, the adventure of, well, how do I get that money? Who do I have to squeeze for a couple of bucks? Can I do this and can I do that? Everything he tries to do fails until the kids all get together and try to work this thing through. And so that was a lot of fun for me anyway, is to try to bring it all together, to make it all work, and to see if it would actually happen. And maybe it did, and maybe it didn't, so that's part of the story.
That's what I was going to ask you both. In The Big Dream, was there a scene that you had the most fun writing together?
Well, for me, there's so many little ones. We tried to sprinkle it with humor around every corner. So to me, there was a lot of episodes like that. For example,
I like the lingerie.
Of course you would. Yeah. So that one, they're walking and having fun downtown, and they think they have all this time. And then
before the race, the qualifying race of who's going to get to go into the final competition.
Yeah. And so one of the characters, which is the youngest one, Skip, he's the klutzy one. He's always tripping over himself. And
because he's trying to keep up with the older kids.
And he tells them just right off the bat that, the qualifying race is next week. And they're like, "No, you don't know anything. You're not with it. What do you mean it's next week?" Well, he starts explaining how it is next week. And he confuses them enough to go, "Man, we need a calendar to figure this thing out." And so they go into a shop and they ask the lady at the counter, "Do you have a calendar that we can take a look at?" And she starts asking them questions, and they don't realize where they are, but they're in a lingerie shop. And all of a sudden, the embarrassment of these boys scouring through the lingerie shop and getting tangled in all kinds of garments they shouldn't be tangled in. And worse, girls are in there shopping with their mother, and they get noticed. And so now it's a real big mess. They forget all about what they were in there for and trying to get out. So those kinds of things, funny scenes, sprinkled here and there, I think help break the technical aspects of, building a car and finding parts and things like that.
So you can't always be serious, right? When you're building cars, you have some fun.
Yeah. It's a very cute scene.
But there's a number of them like that in there. And so to me, it was fun writing that.
Yes. Another question. What's one piece of feedback that you've gotten from a young reader about either The Birdcaper or The Big Dream? What really stuck with you?
I got this one first.
Oh, you got that one. Huh?
Okay. This was a comment that we got from a little boy who had his, I think he probably had an assistant in the classroom help him with reading.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had the assistant also help him with a response. And it was just adorable. And he was from the UK again, I think I said that. And so they have different slang words than we do. And he was so impressed. He said, I sort of felt sorry for Brandon at first because he really didn't like school. And he said, but he hung in there and he got through this. And he said, and he had a lot of trouble. Brandon, he was a real battler because I guess, how was it spelled? Battler. It was so cute. I guess that means somebody who hangs in there and perseveres. Brandon was a real battler. And that's not a term that our kids use,
Wow.
And so I thought that was just adorable. Yeah. Would this one stick out to you?
Well, there's we really get a kick out of it when kids that we intend the books to be for are the ones that send those comments, or the parents explain how they feel about reading. And so when we hit the mark, it's pretty heartwarming.
Oh, how about the one?
And the one
Flashlight?
Yes. So our editor has a daughter, and he's got books in his library. And for some reason, his daughter decided, hey, I want to read this one. It turned out to be The Big Dream, the first version, by the way. And he told us that this book is the only one that she took and read from cover to cover. And she would start reading a book and give up and start reading a book and find another one. But for some reason, she gravitated toward that one, which was kind of heartwarming because it started out as a book for boys. And here she is. And that's really of interest to her. And then he sends us a note that this was really becoming an issue because he would find her under the cover with a flashlight like you would see in a movie. And all of a sudden, she would yell out something that,
oh, something's happened to Ralph. The crow's name is Ralph. Oh no, something happened to Ralph.
Wow.
So
adorable.
Those kinds of comments are fun.
Yeah, and it's very special. Thor is on a much better daily clock than I am, and he typically is the one whose feet hit the floor first in the morning than mine. And I'll come down, and I usually get right on the computer and things like that, and he'll come to me and he has this look on his face and I go, oh, okay. And he goes, you have to go and look on Amazon. You got another review, he goes. And he goes, it's going to make you remember why you work hard at writing. And he goes, you're going to like this one. And he really knows how to start my day. And it's very special. Wow. Yeah. But
it is. Especially knowing that you put all this work and hard work and creativity, and to know that you're getting this wonderful feedback from young readers and their...
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, the parents really enjoy the book. I think it brings memory of simpler times, and
yes.
Books that used to be fun, they used to be wholesome, they used to be full of clean life and, not so much about, well, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff out there about imagination,
Mm-hmm.
but this is something that I think people can relate to, and things that they can do in their own backyards.
I know I could relate, especially growing up when I remember being 10 years old and being in the backyard and playing and just having fun and not even just no care in the world. It just doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl. I mean, you can read your books and just enjoy. It's like a time machine for me, thinking about like if Brandon and his friends were my friends, or thinking about how I used to play with my friends. So I just they're so enjoyable. And I just want you both to know that you're doing such a great job with these books. They're so much fun, and I'm glad that I'm able to share this with our listeners too.
Well, thank you so much. Well, it's nice that you say that, because what we have found out in a very short time is that writing the book is the easy part. The hard part is why we started writing to begin with. We wanted to do something that would inspire children to read, to be lifelong readers, right? I think that's what most authors are hoping for. And getting the book to the children to read is the big challenge. Yeah. So we haven't quite figured that part out yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah, but thank you for saying that also, because that was actually a big motivator for me to write about the physical world, being out there doing things instead of in the basement working on a tablet. Nothing wrong with playing games in the basement, but I think you're missing something if you don't have the opportunity to go out there and actually do something with your hands, maybe be a little bit more social. So I think that really hit home for me.
Yeah. For kids to really play with each other again.
Thank you. I mean, there's a whole generation that may not know that, hey, you can go outside and play and have fun and just run around and have an adventure. That's okay. It doesn't have to be on the screen.
I can't tell you as a child how many hours I spent with just a stick in the dirt and had the best time.
I agree. I mean, just spending hours outside was always fun, even in the rain. So that never spoiled my fun. Now, I have a question for both of you. If you could finish this sentence: when you open one of our books, we hope you feel.
The first thing that comes to my mind is happy.
That was my word too.
Yeah. Hey, see, that's a third word.
Nice. Yeah.
Happy. Yes, happy. That would be a dream come true for me. Yeah, happy.
Because like we say, we want it to be fun. We want it to be realistic. We want it to be relatable. And we want you to have an easy read. We don't want this to be complicated where you need a dictionary to go through it. Make it easy. Sit on a couch or sit outside on a bench or whatever, and just have fun.
And we also strived for it not to be a real long book. We wanted a young person to hold it in their hands and look at it and say, that looks manageable to me, that looks readable. We wanted the book to open up and look reader-friendly. So even though it was prose, we wanted it to look reader-friendly and approachable. And so
you don't want them to get turned off if we had mentioned prior to recording this, reluctant readers.
Exactly.
They think it's too much. They could get turned off by all the text and this, and it looks too what's this word? I got to look it up in a dictionary.
Sure.
You don't want that. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because we want our young people to love reading, not to feel that it's challenging or it's it can be tiresome or complicated. We want them to love it, and it's so many times when you're in school, sometimes I'm not saying this happens, but in my lifetime when I was growing up, sometimes it would be a punishment. So we don't want that. We want children to feel like they could just, go to their library or pick out a book, go to a bookstore and just pick out a book and say, oh, okay, I want to read this just for pleasure.
Exactly.
Not for, getting a grade.
And I know sometimes you ask this question, and when I grew up, there weren't books in my home. But I know sometimes you ask the question, if you could go back and tell your younger self something, what would you say? You ask it much better than that. But if I could go back and give advice to my middle grade self, what I would do is I would advise my middle grade self to read more, because I didn't, and to also build my vocabulary, because reading opens your world, and the more you read, and this whole thing, I think you and I said a little bit to each other about graphic novels at one time.
Mm-hmm.
I think graphic novels are wonderful. I think it can be a real gateway for some reluctant readers. And the graphic novels of today are just exceptional. But to get a book into a young reader's hands is so important, because the more you read, the more you know. The more you know, the more you build your background knowledge, and it opens up everything for your future, and you build your words and your vocabulary, and it just enriches your life, And it doesn't matter if the book is only a quarter of an inch thick. Each time, read it, and one after the other, And I did not do that, and I wish I had. So that would have been my advice to myself.
That's good advice. Well, thank you. Now, it's time for our quick lightning round. Are you guys ready, Victoria, Thor? Are you ready for our quick lightning round?
I don't know. We'll try.
I don't know. Isn't the timer going off?
No, you just take your time. I'll ask you some questions, and whatever comes to your mind, you just answer them. No pressure. No pressure at all.
Okay. Hopefully something will come to mind.
No, it will. Favorite snack while writing?
Peanuts.
Yeah, we both have peanuts.
Dry roasted peanuts.
Nice. If you could have it.
Sometimes popcorn.
Oh, sorry. Mix them together. Popcorn and peanuts, right?
Yeah.
If you could have any animal as your sidekick besides Ralph, who would it be?
Well, I don't know. We've been toying with dogs. There's a lot of character in dogs also. So I think a dog can get you into a lot of situations that would be fun to get out of.
I've tried to plant a few seeds about a dog. I haven't been very successful. Yeah, a dog would be nice. Yeah. Both of our children have dogs, and they're real special.
Yes, dogs are special. And if you can't think of any dogs, perhaps maybe a cat.
We had a cat for 18 years.
Oh, yeah. For some reason, cats gravitate to us. We even have cats outside right now, kind of walking all over our place. So for some reason, we relate to cats.
Yeah. Our cat was named Gwendolyn, and we called her Gwenny. And she was just a honey bun. Yeah.
There you go. There's your sidekick. If not a dog, maybe a Gwenny.
Yeah.
Get another cat.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good planting of a seed right there.
Would you rather solve a mystery or race in a car competition?
I would race in a car competition.
I think I'd solve a mystery.
Biggest oh no moment while writing?
My gosh.
Well, finding a spelling error is kind of, especially after you think you're done, and then trying to fix it,
Well, as we are self-published authors, and I would say trying to publish the book is the all no moment.
Yeah, that's true. When you're all done, when you say the end and it's time to get it out there.
And it's not the end.
It's daunting.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, right?
Oh my gosh. So many pieces of the puzzle.
Now, Victoria, you said that you didn't read that much growing up, but was there a favorite middle grade book you loved growing up? And this is for you, Thor, too.
Well, when I was in 7th grade, they had the program where you could buy, they would hand out the thing and you could buy books.
Yes.
And things like. So I remember I bought the paperback book of The Miracle Worker, and it was about Helen Keller. It was the first book that ever made me cry. So I would say that was the first book that really touched my soul.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say the first book that ever really touched me as far as a piece of literature of like, oh my gosh, this is really what reading is all about, is, now you have to realize that I was raised at this age, this is in the 60s, so didn't have the wealth of opportunity that a young person does today, but it was Great Expectations.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it blew me away. I had never read anything like that. And that stayed with me probably for years. All about Miss Havisham and Pip and Estella, right? and that whole scenario and kind of a mystery of what that was all about. And yeah, so that really made an impression on me. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's a little bit more complicated. When I left Iceland, I was 12. So I got uprooted from my friends, and I was just getting into language then. And when I came to the US at 12, being plumped in a class, I didn't know the language. I didn't know how to read English. I didn't know, well, how to speak it. And there was really no way to make friends. I couldn't talk to them. So it took a while, pretty much through middle grade, to get acclimated into a new lifestyle. So I didn't read much. I was more involved in learning how to function. And so that whole side of my background is missing. But that's not so bad, because now I'm making up for it. I'm creating my own middle ground or middle grade. And so I guess writing about things that maybe I would have liked to do when I was at that age.
So you're writing your own favorite middle grade novels yourself, right?
Yeah. So actually, I guess you could say middle grade is a lot of fun.
It sure is. And you're doing it so well with the humor and the originality. I find to be so captivating in your stories, both of your all three stories. And I have one more question for you both, and this is the last one. If any one of your books were made into an animated movie, who would you love to voice Ralph?
Voice Ralph. Wow. I don't know. That's tough. So crows have a very husky kind of a voice. They're pretty loud. They're pretty obnoxious. So I think it would have to be someone that had that depth and a reach that a crow has. And I'm not sure who would do it.
Yeah, I'd have to really give that some thought. I don't know. I never thought about Ralph having a real voice, because he doesn't speak in the, but you're saying an animated version. Can you think of someone?
You know what?
I don't know. I mean, like Jim Carrey comes to my mind.
Yes. Yeah. There you go. Jim Carrey. Yes.
Yeah.
Because he does good voices.
He has a good range, you know?
He did The Grinch.
Yes.
He was a good Grinch. I couldn't believe it, but he was really good. So yeah, he's a man of 1,000 character voices. So I agree. There you go. Jim Carrey. Yeah, bingo. So that's who we'll call. Ring, 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 Jim Carrey. Oh my goodness. Victoria and Thor, I want to thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I could talk forever.
You've been such a joy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
Thank you. This was fun. And so you have your beautiful books, and I just want listeners to know, go and you don't have to get just one, get all three. Thank you, Victoria E. Pannell and Thorir Sigfusson, the co-authors of the Crow's Tales series, which includes The Bird Caper, The Big Dream, and The Crow's Ring. You can find the books wherever you get your stories, in print, digital, or audio. And don't forget to support your local indie bookstores and public libraries. They're the heart of every reading community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Reading in the Middle wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Anisha Jeffries. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep reading and stay curious.